Welcome to the Play Typer Guy. I'm Stephen Robinson, and joining me today is Meagan Hatcher-Mays, and Director of Democracy Policy at Indivisible, and also founder of the much needed Unrig the Courts Coalition. Thank you so much for joining us today, Meagan.
Thanks.
So, you've long advocated for Supreme Court reform, and before most of us even knew about Clarence Thomas's spa weekends with Harlan Crow, you wrote a piece in May 2019 called "It's Time for Democrats to Get Serious About Reforming the Court." And I just want to read this quote here. Here's a nightmare scenario for you. In 2020, Democrats could win back the White House, the Senate, and maintain their majority in the House of Representatives. They could pass a slate of dream progressive policies like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal, and it won't matter because the current U.S. Supreme Court, stacked with conservative ideologues, will overturn all of it. So, Meagan, where do you keep your crystal ball, and can I borrow it?
Yeah, it. Here's the thing. This is actually like pretty well laid out by the right. Like they weren't being very secretive about their plans for what they wanted to do with not just the Supreme Court, but the lower courts as well. They ever since I think you could actually go all the way back to probably Brown v. Board. The right looked at decisions like that, decisions like Roe v. Wade, any decision that expanded fundamental constitutional rights to marginalized groups. The right looked at that and thought, oh, no, but we can't have that, like, because we want to prevent marginalized people from having expansive constitutional rights. And this court is not doing what we want. So they really hunkered down in the 80s and invented the Federalist Society. They invented the concept of, originalism. That's not a real thing. They just invented it. It's the same age as me, so it's not really, it's not like Thomas Jefferson invented originalism. It's not anything. And they came up with these ways to capture the courts with ideologues who would restrict constitutional rights back to their belief of who deserved them, which is like white, wealthy men mostly. So they've been at this for 40 or 50 years now. And it's pretty obvious it became really clear to everyone, even if you're not really a court watcher, after Scalia died and Mitch McConnell said, I'm keeping this seat open until the next president is elected. That tells you everything you need to know about what the right wants to do to the courts. They do not want to take any chances with the people that they pick. They are explicitly recruiting people who will and did overturn Roe v. Wade, undermine workers' rights, gut the Voting Rights Act, get rid of affirmative action. That's why these people were picked. And that's why my crystal ball is really just my eyeballs.
And something I think a lot of folks, for good reasons, might not fully recognize, and you've clarified about how the court has been radicalized. The Federalist Society, I think, perhaps might have come out of what I used to call the sort of no more suitors movement, yes, which is like no chance of a justice who was going to either grow with the times, adopt, change. I mean, Clarence Thomas hasn't changed his opinion on anything in any way. Same with Samuel Alito. And when we talk about these issues, I mean, obviously losing Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a big deal, as folks say. But when you look back, affirmative action cases, abortion cases, you had Sandra Day O'Connor, Kennedy, had Republican appointees being key swing votes. And what they seem to be doing is sort of with the Federalist Society, as you say, removing, and they're starting this at the lower courts, right? So like, yes, there's a whole generation of judges and justices who will never, there's no chance. If you might as well, I guess you'll do your best if you're as a lawyer, you'll show up, but it's like, look, I can count. There's no argument I can make. And, when you talk about Brown v. Board of Education, I was recently reading about Thurgood Marshall. I mean, he was making arguments that if he was in front of this current court
Yeah.
wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
they they
Right.
would just make stuff up. I mean, there's no like magic wand that I feel of the law. And I feel like there's I don't want to say, perhaps naivete is too harsh a term, but from a lot of Democrats, there's a sense of there's a neutrality
Mhm.
amongst you know the judges or so forth. During Ketanji Brown Jackson's confirmation, Dianne Feinstein, the Democratic senator from California, she said specifically, the Supreme Court is not a political institution.
Mm.
Rather, the court stands above politics and above
Mm.
partisanship. And if we look to federal judges to be independent and unbiased. This is like in 2022.
Yeah,
Can
really
you?
weird. Very weird thing to say. That's completely out of touch with, again, people just using their senses to see or and hear about what's going on with the court. An absolutely absurd thing to say. Really, any year after 2013, but especially in 2022. It may be true that we do look to judges and justices to do that, to be neutral and fair arbiters of the law and constitution, but that is not the reality of what is actually going on.
Mhm,
To your point, I think, to be honest, and just to like extend a little bit of grace in this regard, to your point that a lot of people on the left or liberals or Democrats think of the court as there being sort of neutrality around the court. I actually genuinely think that is because a lot of us grew up thinking of the court as being a body that expanded constitutional rights to people who had been historically left behind, right? So if you grew up between like 1950 and 1990, that was the court you grew up with. It was like a sort of benevolent democratic institution that was kind of doing the right thing, equal justice under law, making sure that people were treated fairly. That's over now, definitively. That the court is not like that anymore. This court is its goal. It's really its stated goal, if you read anything the Federalist Society puts out, is to restrict as much as possible constitutional rights for people they don't think deserve them, and to expand power for corporations, the extremely wealthy, for white men, really, for like Christians. We've seen that a lot over the last 10 or 15 years too. So this idea that, and I think we've heard this from Joe Biden as well, is like, well, I don't want to reform the court or interfere with the courts because that would politicize the body. That has already happened. The court the politicization ship has sailed away, and it's not coming back unless you take steps to reform the court, to bring it back into line. Congress has a constitutional duty to do that. And so far, they've been moving very slowly to hold the court accountable, either for their really out of line rulings, but also for like their extracurricular activities off the bench. It's been really slow going among Senate Democrats to really do something about this. And I genuinely think it's because they're having a hard time grasping that the court has morphed into something
mhm.
different than it was when they were coming up.
Well, yeah, I mean, we saw this with voting rights. There's a sense of we won't or can't do this unless it's bipartisan, and it's like it's going to be very hard to get Republicans to support a Stop Republicans from Cheating bill. It's usually in their best interest to be like, yeah,
There's no, I mean, it's silly. I don't need to tell you, but it's just silly. It's like the Republicans have the court that they have dreamed of since college. Okay, like this is what they want. There's no incentive for Republicans to reform this court. They're getting everything they want. They show up, and to your point, is like, for lawyers going to argue in front of this court, it's like, well, try your best, but you can count. On Republican side, it's the total opposite. I feel like they could just show up and do absolutely nothing and they would still win, because they can count also. So this is the court that they want. This is the court that they've dreamed of and the court that they designed. There's no reality in which a group of Republican senators are going to say, you're right, what we're doing is super unfair, and we want to join you in reforming the court.
Yeah, I mean, my wife is an attorney, and we were discussing this, and she's like, it's she obviously can understand conservative jurisprudence, and it was sort of it's not some of these recent sort of the anti-gay bill, or rather case recently, and affirmative action. A lot of these cases, it's not about, oh, I understand the conservative jurisprudence that got there. Here it's just stuff of like, and even with with Dobbs, it's like everything you understood or were taught
Mhm.
about precedent and about, you know, say not making stuff up. I mean,
Not lying.
Neil Gorsuch is sort of classic about, you know, clearly making stuff up. He's actually, in certain ways, I mean, my opinion, worse than Kavanaugh. He just makes stuff up. I mean, in
Mhm,
his case with the website designer
mhm.
who felt she was an artist, and having, of course, worked in media and having covered with what qualifies as the creative exemption for overtime. Like, this has been
Mhm.
litigated. Like, they say, no, 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 there's a specific qualification of even what makes someone an artist. And he's treating it as somehow this is some new concept. And also the case, as my wife noted, was like, not okay, well, you should be writing this to not open the door to, you know, discrimination against race, or like, it's not limited. So either he's just incompetent or he really is opening the door.
Yeah.
But I just want to go back to what you mentioned about with the president. So this is after the Supreme Court sort of acting as a super legislative body for the Republicans, overturned his student loan debt forgiveness plan. And we weren't even as ambitious as you had imagined with like Medicare for all or Green New Deal. This was like some basic stuff that they were telling that he can't do. And he said, is if we start the process trying to expand the court, we're going to politicize it maybe forever in a way that is not healthy. And I just ask you, okay, well, what's the solution? If that's
Yeah.
off the table, what is the solution? So we all know
Yeah.
we have a 6-3 conservative court. The three most recent ones are hacks who never would have gotten on the court if Mitch McConnell had not nuked the filibuster. They would never have gotten 60 votes. Um, and we all know that Clarence Thomas, um, Samuel Alito, and John Roberts are never, ever, ever going to retire while a Democrat is president. So then we are in this very kind of morbid
Yeah.
reality
Um,
of hoping a human being dies,
yeah.
which
Like
is against my
in a
own instincts.
in
And
a like politically advantageous way. It's really gross.
it's
Yeah.
not like, I feel that's worse than politicizing the courts, is
Yeah.
like having a system where people wish that, and it's not a democracy. And democracy is like, oh wow, you took away major rights. I know John Roberts gets upset when people are annoyed by decisions that take away their basic rights.
Yeah.
But yes, there's no recourse. Like, in generally speaking, with a president or a senator or anyone, you go out, you vote, you remove them from office. These are people are going to, and perhaps even outlive me. So how do you tell human beings like, okay, well, maybe in 30 or 40 years you won't be a second class citizen, or maybe these people will perish. Well, m- perhaps not in the next 4 or 5 years, and Biden
Yeah.
might be president, and it's highly unlikely because
And
statistically, case Democrats aren't going to be at some
yeah,
point. So where is this? I feel like they're not giving us any reasonable solution or
you're
hope.
right. They're not. I mean, the thing, it's actually worse than what you said. It's like if Democrats do nothing at all about this, like there's a study that's been done that suggests that the soonest Democrats might retake control of this, or like liberal nominees would retake control of the Supreme Court, is 100 years from now. We'll be dead, and we will have died second class citizens, without our rights ever being restored. It's like, come on. Like we can't just, doing nothing is, this is a massive abdication of I think, like, Congress's role in performing oversight over the court the same way they do every other branch of government, and the same way they do federal agencies. The court is not some special thing that just gets to do whatever they want. And by the way, this is not just a petty disagreement about the outcome of a case or two. This is not like, oh, well, I'm really mad and I want to add 4 seats to the Supreme Court because, Neil Gorsuch has a different style of statutory interpretation than I do. Or actually, my favorite color is purple and Brett Kavanaugh's is blue, so I want to impeach him for that. That's not what this is about. We're talking about, like, probably one of the most significant rollback of our fundamental rights in, like, over 150 years, and it's all happening at the Supreme Court. They are doing things at the Supreme Court that Congress isn't able to do because it's so unpopular. Congress is not able to pass a nationwide abortion ban, but the court can repeal Roe v. Wade. Congress isn't able to, pass a law that says you can discriminate against gays at your business, but the court can do that because they are operating as though no one has any oversight over their behavior. And this is not about, like, well, I just happen to I just would tinker a little bit differently on the margins about how you decided that. This is like they're making stuff up wholesale. This 303 creative case about the website designer being able to deny service to LGBTQ folks, that never happened. There was no website. Nobody asked her for a website. No gay person, no straight person. Nobody's asked this woman for a website. And yet her case got all the way up to the Supreme Court, and on a set of completely made up facts, which was just delightfully accepted by Neil Gorsuch, regardless of, like, the reality of the situation. We now have basically the rules of the road in the United States right now is you can put, if you have an expressive business, which literally could be anything, could be website making, could be cakes, could be photography, could be a hair salon, because there's a salon owner in Michigan who's trying to ban trans people from coming to get their hair cut there. You can put up a sign in your business that says no gays allowed. If the court said that was fine, based on no real evidence that this person at the heart of this case had actually suffered any harm or had, like, suffered any First Amendment violation. So that's the breadth of what we're dealing with. It's not just, I disagree with the outcome. It's these people are making stuff up to make our lives worse, and they're doing favors for their Republican friends, even though they're supposed to be nonpartisan. That's what this is about.
Yeah.
So if Democrats do nothing, then we're stuck with that for 100 years, which just doesn't seem very nice to me.
And again, I'm hardly the expert you are, but I know with Marshall and Brown v. Board of Education, he focused also on, it's not just about, access being equal or whatever. It is a sense of this creating the second class is inherently to humiliate a group of people. And you would think that that's, as settled law, would be a theme, right? Like, clearly not wanting, when you say, even when it's sort of giving the game away, my religion believes that you are inferior, so I should not offer you, which again is it's inherently about humiliating another group of people. And I felt like that had been, but again, this is a court that's just ignoring precedent. It's just when, and you had talked about this from a political standpoint, when not that it matters, because you can't do anything with these justices once they're in office, but they clearly lied. And I mean, there was always this sort of too cute by half, specifically with Amy Coney Barrett, of like, oh my goodness, I couldn't speculate on hypotheticals, where it's not like a potential case is going to come before the court. It's like, oh, do you believe in precedent? Do you believe do you believe that Roe v. Wade was reasonably decided? Is not, to me, not a hard question. And the dance around it was just to get on, and then to clearly then immediately find the right case. Because as you said, it's all organized. The Federalist Society, they find, they judge shop, they send folks over specifically to then get the cases they want. And yeah, you're right. You can't really do anything with this 100-year because it's asymmetrical warfare. I do want to you know, Democrats and Biden have rightly spoken about how great it is to have the first Black woman on the Supreme
Mhm.
Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson. But she's not a hack. She's not
Yeah.
like she's not the equivalent to Neil Gorsuch. There's no reality where even if we expand it to court, because that's the fear that they put out there for Republicans. There's no reality where a Chief Justice Jackson and others like her are kind of like we can get a case before them, and they can be like, oh yeah, there's like a period here of the Second Amendment, and actually all guns are outlawed,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
where it's like
Yeah.
they're not. She would never, she's obviously liberal in her jurisprudence, but she is not just a hack. And I feel like that is a point that's often missed. Like, it's not about like this teams. It's sort of, so they
Yeah.
do put they put children. I mean, I think there was one where Democrats, after Trump had been defeated, so like in mid-November, somehow it was the confirmation of this sort of 33-year-old judge from Florida, completely unqualified, had
Yeah.
never, I think, even tried a case or heard a case, whatever, and was on the court for life, and was the one who struck down the federal mask mandate on
Yeah.
airlines with no, I mean, she was might as well have been writing on a cocktail napkin. It was like
Yeah.
so poorly reasoned, but
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. Yes,
Right.
so they get
Yeah.
that. They like get similar to the guy, the hack who knocked over the abortion pill. And
Yes.
they
Yeah.
specifically tried to find this guy. So
Right. I do think that kind of gets lost sometimes in conversations about court expansion. The court expansion advocates, myself included, are not advocating for additional hacks to be nominated and confirmed to the Supreme Court. We're asking for 4 judges who are committed to the rule of law and to protecting our democracy. That's what the Supreme Court is supposed to do. The Supreme Court is not doing that now. And in fact, the Supreme Court is behaving as a threat to our democracy by undermining voting rights, undermining, money in politics. All of that is done, like gerrymandered maps, this term's cases aside. This court's jurisprudence on voting rights and democratic participation has been abysmal. We're not asking for 4 randos who will just do whatever Democrats want. We want 4 people who will judge fairly, which is like the bar's on the floor, and the Supreme Court we've got right now hasn't even met that.
Mhm.
So what we would like is 4 justices who will actually protect our fundamental constitutional rights and protect our democracy from threats, which this court is this majority is not doing. So this is not about like, confirm Meagan and 3 of her friends will just do whatever. This is about, although that would be funny. This is about putting 4 actually qualified people onto the bench so that we can right the ship a little bit, because people need to understand how threatening this court is being to our fundamental rights, to our democracy, and who they're acting on behalf of. It's not us. It's not like the American people or the Constitution. It's none of that. It's really special interests at this point, and that is not sustainable for a democracy.
So what's your thought on like how some of these, especially at the lower court level, I mean, obviously Democrats fight on a larger level, perhaps less successfully at the Supreme Court, but these folks were getting approved, and it wasn't as we've seen with Tommy Tuberville putting the hold and stopping military promotions. One person, one creep can really put a cog in a machine. It feels like through either a misguided sense of comedy or whatever, there was no like we need to stop Trump from putting these just because they are hacks. It's not like we do. I mean, I saw an interview with Chris Coons where he was feeling bad that he had voted against Gorsuch because Gorsuch was qualified. And it's like, okay,
Whatever.
I guess he went to the right schools, dude, but he's like a
Yeah.
fundamental threat. Like, I don't know what, especially in our current reality. If Biden and certain Democrats don't want to expand the courts, can they slow down? Because Republican are going to be president. They're going to be Republican
Hmm.
presidents, and they're going to nominate justices. And how do we kind of at least delay or stop that
Yeah.
kind of?
So it's a really good question. I think the answer is there's probably no way to slow it down or stop it. So right now, like one of the few ways that Democrats have to prevent a Republican nominated judge from moving ahead is something called the blue slip. They used it a fair amount while Trump was in office. Basically, the way it works is if a judge is nominated to serve in a state, the senators from both senators from that state need to return what's called their blue slip and say, I like this person. You can move ahead with the nomination. But one single senator from that state can block that person's nomination by not returning the slip. By the way, this rule is not even a rule. It's not written down anywhere. It's even less real than the filibuster. They just made it up. And so what Republicans did under Trump was they basically were like, well, we're not really going to let the blue slip rule stop us from confirming people in liberal circuits. So some Republican nominees made it through to like the Ninth Circuit, which is pretty liberal, and to other circuits where you wouldn't necessarily expect a Democratic senator to acquiesce to that person's nomination in their state. And then what Democrats did when they regained control of the Senate was say, we are going to restore the blue slip rule and allow Republicans to block as many of Joe Biden's nominees as possible. And in fact, it has the effect of just preventing Joe Biden from nominating anyone at all for certain vacancies, because it's like, what's the point? They're not going to return the blue slip for this person. They're going to block this person. So why would I nominate anybody? So I think the real question is, what can Democrats do to confirm as many people as possible while they have the chance to, so that there are fewer vacancies for Republicans to fill with creepy MAGA judges. And what they can do is that Dick Durbin can get rid of the blue slip rule entirely and just whoosh, 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 spend the rest of the summer and the fall and all next year just filling as many vacancies as is humanly possible, so that there are fewer vacancies for a future Republican president to fill if/when a Republican ever wins the presidency again. So that was like a little convoluted, but really what Democrats should be doing is not thinking about how to block future Republican nominees. They should be thinking confirming as many of Joe Biden's nominees as they can, and they should not let this fake made up blue slip thing be the thing that allows, like, if Trump wins again in 2024, that allows Trump to confirm more judges like Kaczmarek in the Fifth Circuit, who said that the FDA can't approve abortion medication. People like that. Those are the types of people they have waiting in the wings to fill these vacancies.
Kaczmarek especially was like parroting forced birth rhetoric during the arguments. Again, as a lawyer, you gotta like, yeah, this is so going my way.
I'm not gonna win this case.
Like, I don't know. I was gonna maybe man, Dick Durbin, I would not want to be in a zombie movie with him.
No.
Like, I feel like he's not gonna protect. There's a sort of
no.
A friend of mine talks about war Democrats, referencing sort of the concept, The Godfather, and it does feel as if they're in this world of wanting the return of the great country club reality, and perhaps also not getting that this problem, this mess that we are currently in, is actually not unique to Donald Trump. Like, Donald Trump that was perhaps the quote unquote most normal thing he did. In other words, like, if Jeb Bush or Cruz or Romney or McCain had, this is just the work they had been doing. And I remember Nancy Pelosi talking about at one point with Trump, like, pleading with Republicans to be the good Republican she remembers, and we need a strong Republican Party. And I'm like, well, a strong party wins elections. And,
Yeah,
when they win
right.
elections, but this is what, George W. Bush, who I know everyone likes his paintings now, but he appointed Alito and
Roberts.
Roberts. And this is the court, as you've said, Republicans have wanted since, I mean, ever, like
Yeah,
since I would say Brown v. Board of Education. I mean, a sense of we're fighting the rights revolution. Here's how. And that radicalism, I think, has not been truly implemented or understood. And the answer that sort of people the most impacted, so people of color, um, women, LGBT community, should endure this misery and then get out to vote to ensure that Democrats never lose another election, does not seem like actual democracy.
right,
Like, democracy should be, okay, well, if my candidate loses, maybe the tax rates might be different or something, but not literally, oh, I my spouse and I are no longer married. Should
right,
not be up to how elections turn out.
right.
um
That used to be something the Supreme Court stood for. Like it used to be a counter majoritarian institution in the sense that like the court's role is to protect the rights of those who are like not you know that are supposed to protect rights that shouldn't be up for a political debate.
mhm.
And that's not what they do anymore. And I think this idea that there used to be some other different Republican Party that was like on the level, I don't remember that. I don't remember that ever being the case. And I think to your point, I think it's really true. Whether Donald Trump had won in 2016 or some other Republican had won in 2016, the justices would have probably been the exact same people, because Trump turned over decision making for his nominees to the Federalist Society. Literally, he had Leonard Leo, the former head of the Federalist Society, and then he came to the White House to work for Donald Trump to be his nomination czar, basically. So the Federalist Society was like handpicking the people that they wanted. They created a list for Donald Trump of people that they wanted, and he picked his people off that list. That would have probably been true if it had been Jeb or Ted Cruz or Carly Fiorina, whoever, because that is like the North Star, I think, of the right, is that, we might lose an election or two, but as long as we have this super legislature in the Supreme Court, our interests will be protected in perpetuity. So you're right to the degree that like that's the most Republican thing that Donald Trump did, like mainstream Republican thing that Donald Trump did in his presidency, was picking the people that he picked, because I think that's exactly who any other Republican president would have selected.
Oh yeah, and I often quote this following passage from Tony Kushner's "Angels in America" about this. Is when he says, "They got back the Senate, but we have the courts. By the
Mm-hmm.
'90s, the Supreme Court be block solid Republican appointees, and the federal bench, Republican judges like landmines everywhere, everywhere they turn. Affirmative action, take it to court, boom, landmine, and we'll get our way on just about everything: abortion, defense, Central America, family values, and live investment climate." And that character goes on to say, the end of the New Deal, the end of the social
Mm-hmm.
revolution comes through the courts. They knew it would always be through the courts.
Yep.
And to that point, the reason that Amy Coney Barrett or Kavanaugh or Gus, they don't show up like twirling their mustaches or whatever, is because they even know, even through this, even with a Republican majority, there's a certain song and dance I have to do. I can't come right out and say,
Mm-hmm.
this is what I'm going to literally do, because there would be political consequences. But once they're in office, there are none. And I do want to ask you, obviously, I mean, the Dobbs decision was catastrophic in many ways, every way, but specifically the lack of like there was a sense of quote unquote small c conservative ideology in the idea of the most let's say, Nancy Pelosi West Wing idea of what conservatives believe. There is idea of like change but not reckless, change but slow, change but whatever. And they did this without it seeming like any who cares about the women who are going to literally die.
Yeah.
There's a trigger laws that went into place. So it's like, even if you wanted this, it was, the impact was catastrophic and
Yeah.
almost poorly thought out. So what are some of your thoughts on that, of just sort of that kind of recklessness, if no regard?
Yeah. I think they're just not good people. I think they just I don't know how else to say it. I mean, I think that I don't even want to say it this way, but for lack of a better phrase, there is kind of like a weird silver lining to the fact they've been this reckless, because for the first time in my lifetime, people on the left are hyper aware of what the Supreme Court is getting up to and the very direct links between what the Supreme Court does and how it affects your life. That was not true 23 years ago. My first election was Bush v. Gore. And I think that was probably like my generation's first insight into what the Supreme Court gets up to, right? But now, so if there's any consolation, it's that now we all understand exactly what's going on here and who is responsible for taking these freedoms away from us. It's not even really Mitch McConnell. It's like these 6 people that got plucked out of nowhere to show up and hurt people. And that's what they're doing. And I think a couple things I think are really interesting. One is, I think people are starting to understand abortion truly as healthcare. It's not just terminating a pregnancy, because you've seen states now that have banned abortion or severely restricted abortion, having a really difficult time recruiting OBGYNs to come to their state. So there's these big, long wait lists for pregnant people to get doctor's appointments, because there aren't enough OBGYNs in these states to see everybody, which is devastating and will cause a great deal of harm. Then you have places like Idaho that literally had to shut down their labor and delivery units in one of their hospitals because the legal liability for their doctors was too high to risk delivering babies at this hospital, because a lot of pregnancies, even miscarriages, are actually abortions. When your pregnancy ends, it's not, the law, or like your body doesn't make a distinction between how the pregnancy ends, but the law does. And so it puts these doctors in really serious potential for criminal liability or civil liability. So they shut down the labor and delivery unit. So those are the consequences as well of these types of really extreme and reckless decisions. And then meanwhile, you have people who really are getting sepsis, nearly dying or dying, miscarrying without medical support in fast food bathrooms. There's a big story about that in Florida. This is happening because, one, I think the Supreme Court justices are embarrassingly naive about how life actually works for most people. And they also don't care at all. They just don't care, because none of the decisions that they make affect them personally in any way at all. They just don't. And so they don't care. And it doesn't really matter to them. And it might only ever matter to them if somebody in their life is personally impacted by one of their decisions. But I guess up to this point, nobody has been. So that's how I feel about it. I mean, I genuinely think that these are not good people. And I think that the way they try to control that, actually, this has come up a fair amount, when they are criticized, when the conservative majority is criticized, even by their own colleagues. I've never seen this happen before, by the way, in Supreme Court rulings. They'll snipe at each other in their decisions about, and not the normal back and forth where I disagree with the dissent, I disagree with the majority, blah, blah, blah. It's like John Roberts wrote, "Hey, Elena Kagan, stop being mean to me in your dissent. I don't like it. It's not fair to me for you to criticize me." And Alito did the exact same thing. He went to the press and was like, "Elena Kagan's disrespecting me by accurately pointing out the terrible decision that I made." So basically what their dream scenario is, they can do all of the nefarious, dirty deeds that they want, and no one is allowed to complain to them about it, because complaining about it is rude. Criticizing them for the horrible things they do is the rude thing, not the stripping people of fundamental rights. It's
No, yeah.
complaining about it, not doing it.
It's like like a monarchy or aristocracy. It's not a democracy in
Yeah,
any sense. It's sort of
exactly.
we can't remove them. We can't impeach them when they take bribes. Like for
Yeah.
Thompson's case,
Yeah.
we have no power over them.
Hmm.
And even just expressing your constitutional rights. So people in Kavanaugh's neighborhood just protesting peacefully
Yes.
outside his home is so like, oh my God, he's going to get assassinated. We have to have people like that was like
Yeah.
on, even some Democrats on this. Oh no, this sports, people come up to him and are really mean to him at a restaurant. I'm
Yeah.
like,
People yelled at him at a restaurant. Yeah.
I mean, like, look,
So
I work in the creative arts, and look, if you make a bad Marvel movie, you're gonna like probably have people yell at you on the streets. I mean, there
yeah.
were like soap opera stars who they're like, "You stole that man." Like, no, ma'am, I'm an actor, and I'm
Yeah.
like, so the idea that people that having that power over human lives, and as you said, they're clearly it's not good people, but the
Yeah.
arrogance of an Alito to here's this decision, here's the impact, and I honestly, and this is not just pulling out of my own head or whatever. From what I've read, if you think of liberal decisions for like Earl Warren and they really understood the impact it would have, even if it was a
Hmm.
force for good. Here's the impact, and I think it was important why they wanted, the desegregation decision to be somewhat unanimous. It's like they thought about the impact this would have on others, even as a force of good. But here as a force of evil, it's like we're going to put this here, and this won't, God forbid that I get protested or the
Yeah.
public has any recourse. And that is just, but, on that point, before we wrap up here, or to your time, what are our options? I don't have 100 years.
Me
I go,
neither.
I get, I get to the gym. I've cut back on red meat. I don't drink as much,
Drinking
but
more water. That's good.
yeah, but I don't think I'm gonna make it another 100 years. I
No.
and my son probably won't. So,
Yeah.
like,
Sad.
how do we advocate to Democrats to use this power when they receive it? Because it would
Yes.
be just like get rid of filibuster, get rid of I mean, you'd have to like not squander. They squandered their last trifecta thanks to Manchin and
Cinema. Yeah.
Cinema.
Hmm.
But the next time, let's say this happens, they really need to just do this, right? Like,
Yeah.
what are some
Like
things they can do beyond
foot on the
support?
gas. Yeah, let's need to go. There's lots of things that they need to do. I think I'll focus on just a few. One is right now, immediately, Dick Durbin needs to get rid of the blue slips and confirm as many of Joe Biden's judicial nominees as possible. Just so people are aware, not every case goes to the Supreme Court. A lot of these cases are decided like definitively in the lower courts. And there's a bunch of circuit courts around the country that are like exclusively Republican appointed judges. Like that needs to change. It makes it easier, as you were saying before, for conservative litigators to judge shop in districts that either only have one judge that they know is like a MAGA or only has a handful of judges and they're all Republican appointees. So there should be no barriers between Joe Biden's judicial nominees and the bench from here until November 2024. So that's number one. And that's something they could do right now. Number two is they really need to be conducting a series of thorough investigations into the judges' extracurricular activities, which we didn't talk about much today, but these guys are taking lavish trips, they're going on luxury vacations, they're getting their family members' tuition paid for and their mom's rent paid for. The Senate is going to mark up the Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal, and Transparency Act, which is a great first start, but Dick Durbin should be subpoenaing justices and their billionaire friends to figure out what exactly is going on here and whether or not those, I think we know the answer to this, but whether or not those fancy trips and gifts influenced outcomes in Supreme Court rulings. The answer is yes, but the American people really need to see that happen in a series of Judiciary Committee hearings about Supreme Court corruption. And most importantly, in my opinion, we really need to start building up support for the Judiciary Act, which is the court expansion bill that would add 4 seats to the Supreme Court. It would increase the number from 9 to 13. There are over 60 co-sponsors in the House. There are only 3 in the Senate. So it's very likely, if you're listening to this and you have a Democratic senator, your senator is not a co-sponsor of that bill. You should probably call them and tell them to do this, because we do not have 100 years to wait to have our rights restored by a benevolent Supreme Court. So that would be my recommendation of what to do. Again, there's a long way to go to build support for court expansion. So I want to be honest with people about that. It's not like overnight we're going to pass the Judiciary Act, but we've seen the same arc with like the filibuster, right? That started out as pretty unpopular too, getting rid of it to pass stuff. Now you can't run as a Democrat for Senate and support the filibuster, blocking progressive legislation. I really believe that court expansion can be that same type of issue, where if we work really hard and we let our senators know that there's nothing to be scared of, the court's already politicized and all this will do is depoliticize it, we can start to build support for that and make it more mainstream of a reform, so that when we do get power back, we're ready to move forward with like big structural reforms like court expansion.
And just very quickly before you go, because you brought that up with the extracurricular activities, and some folks have stated Clarence Thomas is a hack. It's not like it was a possibility he'd vote one way and he got persuaded, and that obviously is very much doesn't get a lot of the issues there. But one thing that I saw that was interesting was the idea that, Supreme Court justices don't make a lot of money comparatively for their lifestyle, for their colleagues, for the world in which they live. They don't make a lot of money. If you get someone like a Barrett or Gorsuch, folks in their early to late 40s on the bench or early 50s, they haven't, unless they're already independently wealthy, they have accumulated a lot of wealth, and we're asking them to okay, just stay here and be evil until you die. Well, they want to enjoy a certain lifestyle, and that is what someone said I read somewhere that it was not so much about bribing them on cases, it's bribing them to not quit, to stay forever. And I think, to your point, even if these hearings and tests, isn't about you're ever going to force them out for taking the bribes, it is to make it so embarrassing and so humiliating to them that they don't do it. I mean, Alito was writing the op-ed defending himself about how, that private jet was going to go unused anyway.
I know, the seat was open. What do you want me to do?
Poor seat. That poor lonely seat.
That's so sad.
A seat has a purpose, Meagan, on a private jet.
We gotta get the butts in seats.
That purpose was unfulfilled, and Alito nobly
went
on that trip.
It really makes you almost weep thinking about the sad empty seat. I think what you said is totally right. I think basically my take is very similar to what you just said, which is that it may not be, look, Clarence Thomas is never going to deviate from the plan. So it's not necessarily that these perks are convincing him to vote one way or the other. It's a reward. This is his reward for not deviating from the plan. Although I think you could make the argument in Alito's case that, that some of these trips were happening because he had ruled against this person. I think his name's Stringer or something like that. He had ruled against this person's interest previously. He goes on this trip, changes his mind the next time his interests are in front of the court. So that's, I think, a little bit different. But for Clarence Thomas, he's a true believer in this project. And these gifts and payments and travel and all this, that's his reward for doing what they want. Like that, I think you're right. It's like a perk for not quitting and like sticking with it for as long as he has.
Well, thank you for bringing all this to our attention and also documenting ways that we can not wait 100 years, and, and actually have a democracy again. So Meagan Hatcher-Mays, thank you for joining us. Where can people find you in the world and the internet? Whatever.
I'm still on Twitter. Sorry to say, you can find me there. My handle is @ImportantMeagan, MEAGAN, and that's my handle on everything. I'm actually on Blue Sky. If you want to follow me on Blue Sky, it's kind of fun. I'm into it. So follow me on there because it's like the Wild Wild West. I'm just tweeting about the Tour de France and all this stuff. It's very fun. But that's where people can find me. I am still on Twitter. I'm sorry, but they're gonna have to forcibly remove me.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Again, I'm Stephen Robinson. This has been the Play Typer Guy. You can check me out at Wonket and also on my YouTube channel, The Play Typer Guy, and the podcast. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time. Take care.